Jim, I have another question for the late night drive-thru, and
Brian, I have another answer.
I see I don't have a name here for the person, so I apologize in advance, but it's a good question. This may be a relatively silly question, but with a lot of unnecessary high spots in the business today, I'd like to talk about a somewhat simple high spot. At least it's probably considered simple now due to hindsight. That makes no sense.
Either you can't read or they can't write.
Yeah, let me start this one over. Fucking.
Okay.
This may be a relatively silly question, but with a lot of unnecessary high spots in the business today, I'd like to talk about a somewhat simple. Fuck.
You know we ought to leave this one.
This may be a relatively silly question.
It's apparently a question that cannot be spoken in English.
All right, hold on. This may be a relatively silly question. All right.
Okay.
Hello, Jim and Brian. This may be a relatively silly question.
I'm sorry. Is it a relatively silly question?
Hello, Jim and Brian. This may be... Come on. All right.
That's the word.
Hello, Jim and Brian. This may be a relatively silly question, but with a lot of unnecessary high spots in the business today, I'd like to talk about a somewhat simple high spot. At least it's probably considered simple now. The drop kick. Guys like Mr. Perfect, Bob Holly, and Doug Furness are just a few examples. All had tremendous drop kicks. Is there anyone past or present that you feel has or had the best drop kick? It could be one guy, or maybe even a girl. Or it could be several if you can't narrow it down to just one.
Oh, my God. I mean, through the years, there have been so many people that did that so well. And somebody just tweeted actually a clip from OVW TV of Randy Orton when he was training in OVW. He would jump up, kick off, and do a backflip and land on his fucking hands and knees. And it looked really cool, and I don't know why he does it anymore. Maybe he said, well, I guess I'm flirting with disaster or whatever. But, I mean, you know, my God, and every area had their drop kick specialist. If it was the Midwest, it was Flying Fred Curry, or if it was down in Texas or wherever, it was Red Bastien. And, I mean, Ricky Gibson, when I remember in Tennessee, Ricky Gibson had an incredible drop kick. He was one of the first guys I ever saw threw one off the top rope before it was named missile drop kick. My God, he threw a drop kick off the top rope. So it's impossible to call who's the best star. Bobby Eaton, believe it or not, had an insane drop kick that he almost never did. But he did it on one of the pay-per-views, WCW pay-per-views, Chicago, when we had the match, I think it was, with Jack Victory and Randy Rose and Paul Lee. I believe that was the one, or there was one of them from Chicago, where he threw his drop kick off the top rope, hit the guy, and then landed on his feet. And it was goddamn just effortless, like he just, you know, and it's just goddamnest thing. But you can't narrow the best drop kick ever down to even a handful of people. My God.
Well, how about I name a couple and you rank them on a scale of 1 to 10?
Well, all right, I'll do that since I'm just making the scale up and it's totally out of my ass.
Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig.
Well, he was almost perfect. What can I say? Perfect 10. No, Kurt, I mean, shit like that. You know, he had such precision of movement, and all of his shit looked so crisp, and it looked good. Yet, if you have the eye to know when a guy's working, you could tell that it was incredibly safe. So, yeah, he was definitely excellent.
Doug Furness.
Doug was insane because he had those big fucking thighs. He had like 34-inch thighs. And at, you know, I think he was 5'10", and when he was powerlifting, he probably had a body weight of like 260 or 265, 270. He was short and squat, but he could get height, and he would do the flip over thing. You know, that really cool kick off and flip over and land with your head facing the guy you just kicked. Doug's was excellent also.
Jim Brunzell.
You know, from what I recall, it was good. I know they were the high flyers, so it seemed like that would have been right on in their wheelhouse. I truthfully need to brush up on my Brunzell because I've never watched that much Jim Brunzell, but I don't remember anything wrong with it.
Jimmy Golden, someone people probably don't think of with a drop kick.
Good God. Well, because we told the story of the first day on Smoky Mountain Television. I asked him, I said, Jimmy, what do you want to use for a finish? And he said, well, I throw a pretty good drop kick. Okay. It didn't really, tickle my taint that much, but I said, all right. He fucking ended up with a spot where the babyface making a comeback and he's hitting the ropes and Jimmy dropped down and babyface came off the other side and Jimmy just jumped up and just threw those big long legs out and kicked this motherfucker. He stopped him in his tracks. It looked like his kids would be born dizzy. Just knocked the fuck out of the guy. You could hear his feet land on the guy's chest. I mean, didn't kick him in the face. It wasn't dangerous, but it was definitely a stiff drop kick. I said, okay, now I understand why that's your finish. So yeah, and you don't think of it, but he could do it.
Coco Ware.
Oh, good gosh. At Coco, I've said before, and I know somebody on Twitter actually was like, oh, yeah, right. Coco Ware was one of the most athletic guys that I've ever seen in a wrestling ring until he went to the WWF and got the bird. And then something happened. I don't know what. But Coco not only had an incredible drop kick, but could do it off the second turnbuckle and still get height off of it. When he did the missile drop kick, and also took the big fist drop when they first switched him heel, and he was working with Lawler in Memphis. He'd been working for about 3 years, but he was coming off the top rope 5 or 6 feet above the turnbuckle with the fist drop all the way across the ring, or he'd take these big bumps over the top rope backwards, ass over tea kettle, huge backdrops, just insane stuff. He was it was some high risk shit, but you could tell he knew how to do it also. And he wasn't hurting anybody. Obviously, Lawler wouldn't have been working with him, but he was incredible. Just the athleticism, and him and Bobby Eaton as a team for like that year they were together in 82 were just incredible. So Coco but now WWF Coco Ware, from what I remember, is maybe about 20 or 30 pounds heavier and relying a lot on flapping his arms and singing the bird song.
There used to be a clip at the beginning of every episode of the UWF of Coco, like you were saying, jumping off the second turnbuckle and just destroying Gustavo Mendoza with a drop kick. It was one of the most brutal drop kicks I've ever seen. Just right through his face. Just incredible.
Well, as a matter of fact, now see, Gustavo Mendoza was not Jerry Lawler, and Coco was trying to get over. So I can see where that happened also.
What about Skip Young?
Oh my gosh, he's a guy that a lot of people don't talk about these days. The original Sweet Brown Sugar. As a matter of fact, there's the thing with Skip Young became Sweet Brown Sugar under a mask in Florida, and I think it was probably the best use I saw of Skip Young because he was a black kid, very athletic, smaller but a high flyer. And really had a ripped body. He was really in good looking shape, but he had, I don't know what it was, whether it was a lazy eye or one eye was off kilter or whatever, but he had an odd look in his eyes. And the mask kind of softened that up a little bit and made him look a little bit more like a star. So I thought it definitely helped him, that outfit. But when he became Sweet Brown Sugar and got over, that's when Lawler was trading back and forth and going back and forth to Florida talent. So I think he saw that. And when they switched Coco heel and gave him a push, they had renamed him Sweet Brown Sugar. So in a lot of the newspaper ads at the time, you see Sweet Brown Sugar in Tennessee and Florida at the same time, and it wasn't the same guy.
I don't know if you've seen enough of him, but have you seen Okada's drop kick?
Oh, yeah, and Okada, present day. Yes, I've definitely seen. And he gets great height. He gets tagged or hang time. His timing is good on when to kick, and it looks safe. So I would have to give him a bunch of stars on that one. Okay,
well, before we go with this relatively silly question, Jim, who's the worst drop kick you've ever seen?
Besides me? No. I have thrown one drop kick in a match in my life. And it was on a spot show with Bobby Fulton. And for what I don't remember whether it was a tag match or whether a couple times I actually worked singles matches with him. And he used to punish me by making me do shit to him and blowing me up. But I'm getting heat on him or whatever. And Bobby's a couple inches shorter than I am. And he had a good bouncy ring that day. And I was feeling a little froggy. And plus, he was kind of staggering, so he had his knees bent. So he was crouched down about another 2 or 3 inches. And I thought I could do this. And without telling him or anything, I just jumped as far up near as I could and threw my feet out in front of me and drop kicked that motherfucker right in the chest. And almost fucking got whiplash when I landed. And fucking I pushed him all the way across the ring, and I never did that again. But I did it. But having said that, who's the worst actual wrestler throwing a drop kick? I seem to recall George Goulas trying a couple things that didn't turn out well. But I mean, I've seen so many goddamn now. So, because when I started going to training seminars and having seminars at OVW and Ring of Honor, I've seen so many just horribly executed simple moves that it just blurs. I can't really remember right offhand.
There's got to be someone who is so energetic and so ready to do their drop kick and wouldn't get, above the waist. They would just drop kick.
Here's speaking of energetic and so ready, it wasn't a drop kick, but it was a clothesline. So it's a good story. So I'll tell it because we're searching for some end of this bit. Mike Furness, Doug Furness's brother, also played for the University of Tennessee and was a big volunteer football hero and not as big as Doug. But we trained Mike because Doug agreed to come into Smoky Mountain in Christmas of '93. And work a tag team match with the Heavenly Bodies if we'd train Mike enough to where he could get by and have a match with him and his brother. Absolutely, we'll do that. So we got Mike in the ring, in the warehouse, and blah, 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 whatever the fuck, a time or two. And because he had never wrestled and hadn't really trained at that point. But finally, we got it where we thought we had a pretty good match. Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey and Doug was going to be there to lead Mike on his side, and we were going to get the heat on Doug so Mike can have the big hot tag, right? And they built it as his Christmas night in Knoxville, Tennessee, and a bunch of the Furness family and friends are there. And Doug sells like he's going to the electric chair, and the Heavenly Bodies just beat him, and he's trying to crawl to the tag and milking the tag and begging for the tag, and finally he hits that tag to fucking Mike Furness, and the place blows, and Mike jumps into the ring, and he's going to run, and he's going to hit fucking Tom Pritchard, I believe it was, with a clothesline. And he was so fired up when he got that tag, he jumped into the goddamn ring and took 2 or 3 steps so fast and hit Tom Pritchard with that clothesline and jumped into it. And Tom took the bump, and Mike kept going and flew through the air and landed on the other side of the ring and rolled right under the bottom rope and flipped right out the other side and onto the concrete floor. Busted his ass. And he was in the ring for 3 seconds. And the people went, hey, ooh. And then he jumped back up and fucking came back in the ring and started. And this time because every time you fall on your ass, you're going to come back in with potatoes. So he jumped back in and started beating the bodies up for real. But that was one of the most fired up comeback clotheslines I've ever seen. And there was a drop kick that ended bad for Dick Murdoch. Have you heard this story?
No, tell me. Dick
Murdoch is working with somebody in Mid-South. And he's supposed to fucking slam him or do whatever the fuck he's done. He's going to turn around. He's going to yell at the crowd. And the babyface is going to drop kick him in the back. He's going to take a bump over the top rope. He does whatever he's going to do. And he turns his back on the babyface and he's shaking his fist at the crowd. And somebody balled up their drink cup with all the ice left in the bottom of it. About a softball-sized fucking rock of ice. And throws it into the ring. And it flies in and boom, and hits Dick in the back, and he fucking ran and took a bump over the top rope for a fucking cup of ice.